eastern Idaho and central Idaho. But the whole state has the largest wilderness area in the lower 48 states. The central part of Idaho has almost no people. It's accessible only by certain ways, and of course flying is one of them. And this is taken about 5 miles from where my place is in Idaho. And there's a wilderness area called the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness Area there. It's 2.5 million acres. There are no roads. It's difficult to get in. It's beautiful country. It's got rivers that run through it, very deep canyons. It was a lot of historic Indian country from the old days, and a lot of gold mining in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And it also has connections back to when Lewis and Clark did an expedition in the 1803 to 1805 time period after the Louisiana Purchase. They crossed the Continental Divide here at Lamhi, Idaho, which is about 20 miles from where my place is. And they were looking for the passage between the Continental Divide, where the rivers would flow east versus west, and they thought there was going to be this one-day hike, and you should take everything over and then you float to the other ocean. Didn't quite turn out that way. But they came through this country right near where I live. And Lamhi Pass is where they crossed. It's a low spot between east and west in Idaho. It's the homeland in Salmon, Idaho of Sacagawea, who was the interpreter and to some extent guide for Lewis and Clark when they came through there. She had been captured by Indians, different Indian tribes on the other side of the divide, and when she came back across with Lewis and Clark, the first people they met on the other side of the divide was her brother, who is now the chief of that tribe, and that was a huge fortune for Lewis and Clark because they then got access to horses and equipment and things that they needed to make their trip successful. So that's one of the claims to fame for this area. You'll notice there's the Yellowstone River that runs one direction. There's the Salmon River that runs all the way to the ocean. The Yellowstone is the largest undammed river in the United States, and the Snake River drainage is the second largest undammed river. And that's why it's very popular to get in there. My place is near Tower Creek, and the Indians brought Lewis and Clark up here to see these things that he called in his journals the pyramids. And that's about a mile from where I live. It's nice country. And I have a cabin there. I have an airstrip that I built at my house, so I fly right into the house 12 months out of the year, snow or no snow. I have a D3 bulldozer. I move snow in the wintertime, so I can stay stay in the air 12 months out of the year. Whenever I can leave MIT, you will find me back there flying. This is a Cessna 206 six-passenger 1964 vintage, same model. I've looked, of course, in the smaller Cessnas and Cherokees, but same vintage airplane. It's a wonderful, it's just basically a station wagon, an SUV for hauling stuff. And we always say if you can get it in, you can get the door closed, you can fly with it. I do trees, rocks, lumber, fuel, propane, diesel fuel, whatever will go in there. I take flying. And my airstrip sits in a little canyon here. This is a box canyon called Tower Creek. It comes from the main Salmon River. Come up here about 3 miles to my airstrip right here. This is the Continental Divide between Idaho and Montana. So when you fly in here, at a certain point, which is well below here, you're dropping into this canyon with 1,500-foot walls on it, and then you've got the Continental Divide to 10,000 feet in front of you. So when you make that turn, at some point, you are committed to land someplace, one way or another. That's something that's very different from the way you learn to fly. And I appreciate why we teach pilots to fly. You can always go around. You can always go around. Well, that's the first thing we learn in backcountry flying is sometimes you can never go around. And there's a point, you need to know exactly where that point is on every airstrip of where to make that decision. Because once you come down, there might be elk running onto the airstrip. There could be deer. There could be ruts, potholes, gusts, whatever. And you still have to come down. So we're not looking for greaser landings back here many times. Sometimes you'll just pull a throttle back and drop onto the runway because you've got 500 feet to stop. So it's a very different kind of flying, but it's very fun. Here's my airstrip I built. It's what I consider the perfect airstrip. It's it's 75 feet wide, so it's like twice as wide as an airstrip needs to be. So if I've got side gusts, I can adjust for it. And it's terraced. It's not flat. No airstrip should be flat. It's a lousy way to build airstrips. To maximize both landing and takeoff, an inclined airstrip is ideal. Mine, I have to overfly an obstacle here. I touch down on this 5-degree upslope. I've got a flat part here where my hangar is, and I've got a 9-degree upslope at the top. From the air, everything looks flat. And that's the first thing you learn in backcountry flying is you have no idea what you are looking at. If you ever walked it, you go there for the first time, you're going to find out what it is when you attempt to touch down. And a lot of things can go wrong if you're not careful. So I keep this open in the winter and I fly in the snow. If you go to the west, this is where the Snake River runs from Salmon. The main Salmon runs up here about 10 miles north, turns, and then turns into the middle fork of the Salmon River. And on the far side of that of this ridge, this is the Napoleon Ridge. On the far side of it is the wilderness area. So I'm about 5 miles from the largest wilderness area in the lower 48 states. And I built this airstrip myself with a D3 cat. It took me about 4 summers of work. It's like moving dirt with a teaspoon. The D3, I needed a D8 or something bigger, but it was just like the most monotonous thing you will ever do, pushing dirt back and forth. But I feel like I finally became an engineer when I had a bulldozer, an excavator, and a compactor, and I started moving dirt. So it's feels good to do something. I do all computer simulations. I spend my life in front of a computer, so I find it fun. As I said, I keep my airstrip open all winter long, and in a lot of the pictures you're going to see this yellow airplane. It's much more photogenic than mine, and I tend to take pictures of my friend that I fly with, and so that's why on your announcement it had the yellow airplane. It sticks out a lot more than my dull old white airplane. And this is a 1953 vintage Cessna 180. A meticulous electrical engineering friend who tore this completely apart, rebuilt absolutely everything himself, and it took him about 5 years to do that. And we fly together all the time. He's a wonderful pilot, and this is the greatest airplane you'll ever fly. It outperforms all of the newer versions. It's much lighter. They got much heavier later. It's a wonderful, wonderful airplane to fly. If you look, here's Lewis and Clark airstrip. I named it Lewis and Clark because there wasn't a Lewis and Clark airstrip, and Lewis and Clark camped on my airstrip. Well, long before it was an airstrip. But they came out to see the towers. They spent the night, camped right on the property that I have there. And if you go to the west, you'll see all these airports back here. This is the wilderness area. And you can see the Salmon River flows through here. The Continental Divide is running right here. And all these airstrips, many of them, the ones that are not marked private, are on public land. 2/3 of the state of Idaho is public land. So there's a tremendous number of places to go. So one of the bad things about private airstrips like mine, you need permission to land. And that's usually for liability reasons, that you don't make it a public airstrip. And then there are a lot of people who have private airstrips who just don't want anybody else flying an airstrip. I let anybody who will ask fly mine, as long as they'll fly in once with me in the right seat to show them how to do it. And I let them fly. But these airstrips are fascinating in this country. The 2 main forks of the Salmon River, the Middle Fork and the main Salmon, run for hundreds of miles. And all along the riverbanks are homesteads from the early 1900s that people built, and they farmed and they had cattle. Even though it's a very steep mountainous country, they homesteaded there. Very rugged life. And many of those places still exist today, and there are lots of hot springs. There are, I'll show you a bunch of them. If you go in there, it's very deep canyons, 3,000-foot deep canyons in many places. So you can walk in there, you can take horses if you like. There are no roads in there. And it's beautiful country. There's a lot of horse packers that go in. The most popular way to go in is by raft. You can get dropped at one end near Stanley, Idaho, and you can float, all the way basically to the east, north, and back to the west of Idaho on the Salmon River. And this is up near the headwaters of Boundary Creek. A A lot of the water can be a little challenging if you haven't been in whitewater conditions. It's, lower parts will be class 4 rapids. It can be a little challenging at times to get through there intact. I have drunk a lot of water in that river on both rafts and kayaks. I do a little bit of kayaking. I'm a much better pilot than I am kayaker, so I spend a lot of time upside down in my kayak. And I get pulled out. I have a neighbor who takes people fishing. He runs egg paw outfitters, and this is fly fishing, another kind of fly fishing in the Mackenzie River drift boat. They come out of Alaska. They're very good for fishing because this one guy can hold that boat in the river for pools for fishing. So a lot of people come in by river. Many people, even who want to hike, start their hike by airplane. So you get dropped off someplace, you'll get picked up someplace, you can make arrangements for doing all that. You take all your gear in. This is a Cessna 185, traditional workhorse of the backcountry, still used today, just like they were. It's a tremendous little haul. I mentioned flying in the wilderness. When I do this, I quite often go and we do formation flying. I had never formation flown until I got hooked up with this guy who is a tremendous glider pilot, a world-class glider pilot. And they do lots of tandem flying in gliding because you're doing spiral circles trying to catch updrafts where you're very close to them. So he's very comfortable being 50 feet away from me. I'm not very comfortable being 50 feet away from him. Because as you know, air isn't still, right? You know, it's moving all the time. And so we do tag team flying because a lot of times, well, occasionally you have mechanical problems, right? It's always nice to have another airplane. I like to fly when it's not prime season. So long into the fall and the winter, there is nobody home when you go flying. So if something goes wrong, it's nice to have a second airplane to get out, get repairs. I've lost starters, alternators, nose wheel. Things just do go wrong. For me, it's a challenge. Here you can see them pretty plainly, but it's amazing when you're in the air. Even if you know what you're looking for, at 1 mile distance, it can be very hard to see somebody. So you got to stay right on each other, especially in the mountains, if you want to keep track of each other. The wilderness area, right at the edge of it, there's one strip that almost everybody goes to for their first backcountry flight. It's called Johnson Creek. And every Father's Day, they have this gathering, and they get 200 aircraft. So I argue this is not the backcountry aid because there's a road right there, and you've got 200 airplanes here. This is not the feeling I'm looking for when I go backcountry flying. But I understand why people do it. You've got a lot of flatland flyers who've never been mountain flying. This is the easiest mountain strip to come down on. It's 3,500 feet long, and it's 150 feet wide. For God's sakes, I could land across it. It's nicely maintained. You can camp there. We've got showers. It's a great place to go. But there have been more people killed at that airstrip than any other backcountry strip in Idaho. And it barely qualifies as a backcountry strip because there's so many people there. And you've got people that aren't used to mountains. They're not used to maneuvering around mountains. They're not used to not being able to see people from long distances. And this happens to be 2 people were killed in a crash right over the airstrip. They didn't see each other come in. One came right down on top of the other as they were both trying to land. And that was that. But it's not all that common. I mean, flying is safe. I mean, statistically, even among backcountry, I read all the statistics from Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana. And less than 1 in 7 crashes has a fatality. Usually you survive. And in the backcountry especially, these are airplanes, for the most part, which try to fly slow, right? So you have a great chance of surviving everything except a spin stall accident. It's the one thing to avoid. I'm sure you've all learned that if you've been flying. What I look for is the updated version of what, when I was learning to fly, we called a $100 hamburger. It must be a $250 hamburger today. There are places you can go, if money is no object, to get breakfast. And one of the places I like to go is the Sulphur Creek Ranch at the headwaters of the Salmon River. There's a lodge built in the 1940s there. It has a small airstrip. Actually, I consider this a huge airstrip. It's about 3,000 feet long and 30 feet wide. Very easy to fly in there. I would recommend this far more than Johnson Creek for a place to go if you don't really have experience. It's an easy approach. You can't go around, but you've got so much to work with. You could fly this. If you decide not to land, you just do a nice turn to the left at 50 feet elevation and you can get out of it. Not a problem. It's very nice. As many of the improved airstrips, they're dirt and gravel. You will see rocks and other stuff. You don't want to have really small tires on these, but you don't need you don't need 36-inch low inflation tires to go into most places. It's a really nice location, a nice old lodge in there. You can come and stay overnight. You can come for meals. You can do hikes. You can do horseback riding, whatever. It's a really nice place, and they make great breakfast there. So it's very common for us. And often when I take people for their very first time to fly in the backcountry, I always start here. And I have learned that that's not always the best idea, because some people do have a little bit of weak stomach, and when you put the biggest possible breakfast in somebody, there can be dire consequences to that. So it's a much better strategy to take them to the other strips first and then end up here for breakfast. But it's a wonderful place. They treat you really nicely. I park right on the lawn when I fly up. I go in and I help them in both spring and fall get ready for operations and post-operations. So this is my Cessna 206. I'll tell you a couple of things about it. It's very low hour for 1964. It's 4,200 hours. It has a 280 horsepower Idaho 520A engine. It's just about to see its last overhaul. It has seen its last overhaul. I reached TBO a month ago, 1,700 hours, time between overhauls on this engine. It has been overhauled 3 times in its life, and it's time for the $75,000 front end for this airplane. It has a bush stall cuff on the leading edge of the wing. It has droop tips that go with that. It's got stall fences. It has heavy-duty nose gear, oversized nose gear. Notice how it's sunk down in the sod here. This is soft. That's another thing you'll see in the backcountry. It helps to have oversized tires. The mains are oversized as well, but not huge. I put VGs on. For those of you who are aeronautical engineers, you must understand about vortex generators. One of the weirdest things to me is the fact that these things actually do what they're promised to do. And I put mine on myself. I tested my airplane just before and just after in lots of different challenging ways to see if these VGs really work. And I wouldn't put any stock in them for reducing stall speed once you have a stall kit, but for controllability at minimum and below airspeed. If you want to roll, you want to turn, you want to rudder, you've got a lot more authority with VGs. They really do the trick. Now I know if you're on a commercial airliner, you look out there and you'll see 4 or 5 VGs on a wing, right? And there's not very many. We've got a full length, full height, helps give you improved rudder control. They're on the bottom side of the stabilizer, and it gives you improved ability to stall at low airspeed. You want to be able to get your nose way up. It gives you a lot more authority to do that. It keeps the air attached to the surfaces. Now, flying's been going on a long time. At Sulphur Creek Ranch, I lifted these from their website. Back in the 1930s and 1940s, people were flying in the wilderness areas. They've been doing this forever. And the Frank Church Wilderness Area was made wilderness in 1980. Airplanes and airstrips and all this stuff. We don't have roads. We don't allow chainsaws. We don't allow any mechanized vehicles. You have to use wheelbarrows. If you want to grade something, you have to pull your grader with a horse. But we allow airplanes, and it's hugely controversial. But philosophy that prevailed was, look, it's the only way to get stuff in here in any reasonable fashion. It's been going on for 60 years. In fact, this is a DC-3 at that Sulphur Creek airstrip in the 1950s. Big planes into some of these places. In the winter, there were rudimentary skis on the older planes. And people came in, it was recreating. And so they operated, like this is Sulphur Creek Lodge, had an airplane at the time. All of their lumber and supplies come in for any kind of construction that you do. I knew a guy who runs a lodge, and he brought in more than 50 Cessna 206 loaded with bags of concrete to build something. And you got to get it done, so that's how they do it. And of course, like always, there are accidents even with the people who do this all the time. It's sort of a mixed bag if you look at the statistics. If you stand back far enough, you'd say one way of looking at the statistics is there's no advantage to being a high-time pilot. You're just as likely to crash as a first-time pilot. It sort of looks that way when you look at the numbers, because you have the number of new flyers versus the number of experienced flyers, the numbers are the same. But these guys are doing hundreds of times as many flights, so on a per flight basis, obviously, they're much safer than the new people are. But no matter how good you are, this can happen. It's not always avoidable. There are these things we call in-holdings in the wilderness area, things which were exempted because they were private holdings, they pre-existed. This is Middle Fork Lodge, very nice place on the Middle Fork River. They're still maintained as commercial lodges today. You can access them from the river or from the air. And they're allowed to go on. You have some small unassuming places along the river that were these homesteads, and so they're still privately held. Each time they come up for sale, the federal government tries to buy them and close them. Many an airstrip has been closed in the wilderness area as soon as the federal government buys the property. There's a big push by the state of Idaho to undo that. Now, because you have all of these places in the wilderness area, they need to get supplies and they need to get mail. And this is Ray Arnold, one of the most superb backcountry flyers you will ever meet. He just retired last year. He's flown wilderness for 40 years. He takes the mail in every week as a contract with the Postal Service to deliver mail by air to these inaccessible. And he will land where there's no airstrip, with a Cessna 185, on ski. And he has, of course, crashed 3 or 4 airplanes in his day. It doesn't always work out, no matter how good you are. But he's a wealth of information. I have met him numerous times when I'm late to arrive, like at Sulphur Creek, because of weather. And I arrive, and Ray will already be there. There's a 50-foot ceiling, and he's there. And he's survived that kind of flying for 40 years. I was sure that he would be killed before he ever could retire, because of the kind of flying he does. Very aggressive, knows where everything is, but the flying gods, they're still out there. So there's commercial service. You can go in. A lot of 206s like this one are used to load McCall Aviation out of McCall, Salmon Air out of Salmon, are the 2 big flyers that will take you into the backcountry. You see some larger aircraft. Does anybody know what this one is? Only one. Oh. All right. It's the de Havilland Beaver, one of the greatest backcountry airplanes ever made. And it's got a fantastic low stall speed wing, and it's a huge airplane. It's big, it's heavy, it carries lots. And these things are about to go away as if you read the statistics in Alaska, they all end up crashing in Alaska or Canada, where the big backcountry flying is done. They're slowly being eclipsed, and they're a great airplane. The other one that we see most often, this is the biggest one we'll see in the wilderness. This is a Britten-Norman Islander. It's a 2-engine IO 540, 300-horse engine, great Hershey bar wing, incredible lift, really poor airspeed at cruise, but it can get up and get down. If you look at the statistics on this, that airplane has a stall speed of 40 miles an hour when you've gone from empty to loaded weight of 6,600. So it can take 3,000 pounds and still land at 40 mile an hour stall speed. So you can put this thing down almost anywhere. It has a takeoff run that's 215 meters. So even though it's a big airplane, it will get up and get down. And it will impress nobody once it's in the air, but getting up and getting down, it's an impressive beast. So we see a lot of stuff comes in because they can just fall so much more, 3 times as much as you could in a 206. The 206 is still used for most of the winter flying in the wilderness area. Put hydraulic wheel penetration skis on so you can put your wheels down and land at real air on hard air strips, and then put the skis down when you want to land back here. Of course, you don't have very good brakes when you're on skis. As Ray would say, you are at the mercy of the gods when you land. that you have no idea whether there's going to be snow drifts, soft snow on one side, hard snow on another side, and you got no brakes. So it's tough, but there's a lot of flying still done in the winter. I have a lot of friends who have skis for small airplanes and they go just to fly. I mentioned the state of Idaho. They maintain airstrips. It's unusual to have the state involved in trying to save these airstrips, to keep the federal government from taking them over and closing them down. So we work, and many of us do volunteer work for this organization to help them. The Idaho Aviation Association is extremely active in getting people interested in flying, helping them fly, providing access. If you go to their website, you can look at webcams from all of the remote strips to see what the weather is like. Really good organization. They support all of these airstrips in Idaho. And we start, real airstrips or real airports are over here. But we have some communities whose primary access is through air. We have developed airstrips, the primitive areas, lots of strips, ones that I like, which are the wild ones, and the other category are the real interesting ones, where there's almost no reason to go, but we do anyway. IAA just built a new $2 million lodge, all volunteer contributions, labor, and money, to replace the lodge that burned down a decade ago. It's a fantastic lodge, beautiful, beautiful place. You can go there and get great meals, stay overnight, hike, do whatever, fly. So it's a great destination. A lot of people go in and fly out of there just to go to the other airstrips. You will see these type-specific club fly-ins that show up. There are groups for Huskies, Cubs, and 180s, and whatever type of airplane you might be interested in. They come and they all gather up, a whole bunch of people, and they go fly someplace for a weekend, and then they will stay there and they will fly to all these other strips. So those are the times when people like myself don't like to go flying, because now we're having a bunch of people from someplace else. Not only are they flying where they haven't been before, but they tend to do it right behind one another. So you'll see 4 or 5 of them following each other. So it can be a little intimidating, but I understand why they do it. It's a great experience if you're coming from someplace else to go fly in the wilderness. Some people just like to go hiking or camping. This is Goldbug Hot Springs in the wilderness area, a beautiful place. Idaho has more than 200 hot springs of all different kinds. Many are along the rivers. Some of my serious kayaking friends sleep in these so they can kayak in February when it's all ice. And they'll have their camps in these things to stay warm. The old timers even drug real bathtubs into some of these places. Clear up on the hillside, you'll find these ridiculous looking contraptions that have been put together so these old miners could take a bath. It's a fascinating thing. We often stop when we're going down the river, especially this one. I like to shower. It's a really great shower here. Perfect temperature water, just about the maximum temperature you could stand to be under the shower. But they're great. Some people just come in to do that. Many people come in to fish. Salmon River was named for salmon. Do you know how many salmon come up the Salmon River today? Almost none. Yeah. All of the dams on the Columbia River have basically stopped the salmon from coming up. There's only one species called the steelhead, which still manages to come up. It's a much stronger fish than the salmon. And so they still come up and they spawn about 30 miles from my house. So they come up, they're born right near my place. They then float out to the sea, spend 2 years in the sea, and they come back to the very drainage they were born in. Unbelievable that they can have the instinct to do that. But they literally track these fish and can prove that they really reliably get to exactly the same place. So anyway, if you like to fish, you can fish. If you like to try to fly fish, it's not unusual on a day on the river to catch 100, 150 trout. It's catch and release only on the Middle Fork. You can keep and eat them on banked salmon. There, of course, is hunting. I'm not a hunter anymore. I gave that up when I turned about 18. I used to hunt everything that moved, and then I developed a conscience, I guess. And so I like to see these animals, except on my airstrip. But there are people who come and hunt almost anything still. Accessing by river, this is a put-in point at Boundary Creek. It's kind of a big drop to put boats in, but this is where we start. And the camping along the river is very nice. If you go with an outfitter or even groups of people, private people, it's very restricted. You have basically 6 launches a day to go down this river. It's very restricted. But it's a wonderful place. You meet some great people out there. I go for a couple of trips a year down this. I haven't had a neighbor who's an outfitter, so I throw on a kayak with one of his trips where he has an extra spot and go down in my kayak. Now, I'm not a very good kayaker, and so I spend a lot of time upside when things go wrong, and they go wrong daily for me in class 4 and 1. I don't know what happened over the years. I used to be able to have this incredible, reliable roll, Eskimo roll where you flip back up. And now, if I can get 50% of my rolls, I'm lucky. And to make this at all practical, you've got to be at 95% rolls. If you just swim too much, it's cold. It's just not conducive to that. But anyway, I'm still trying. This is my flying partner with the 180, flying out of Thomas Creek in the winter. Now I want to talk a little bit about real backcountry flying and tell you about the skills that you need to fly back there, because you can start practicing these anytime you're a proficient pilot. And one is extended flight at minimum controllable airspeed. I mean, go up to 4,000 feet. Do this. Do it a lot. I practice it still. I've been doing this 50 years, and I still go out in early season and I practice exactly this. I want to know exactly what it feels like when the bottom's about to fall out. I want to know which way the plane's going to break, depending on how it's loaded. And so it's worth practicing that. Precise runway alignment on takeoff and landing. We have some strips that if you are 3 feet left of center line, you're going to be on a rock. You have to be on the center line. So practice it even on a big strip. Pinpoint landings at minimum controllable airspeed. I say +5 just because I didn't want to actually say below minimum controllable airspeed. So the book's minimum controlled airspeed is a little conservative. A little conservatism put in every place for good reason. That's why you need to know exactly what that airplane feels like. If your stall horn isn't going off, you're not going slow enough for some landings. That's the metric that you use. If you're on center line and you want to do a 180, well, you're 180, but now you're clear the hell over here. So you want to practice clearing the terrain and getting this successful 180-degree turn under your belt. 60-degree bank turns at full power with maximum flaps. I practice that all the time. I want to be able to do a box canyon turn on a dime. And if you can't land or something goes wrong, you need to make a mistake and you go in the wrong place, you need to get out. You need to be able to do that turn. So it'll be a climbing turn. You're always going to climb to try and get some away from the terrain and valleys. And then you want to do that turn. And you can do that in an amazingly little distance. A couple hundred feet is plenty to make a turn. The way you practice it. You got to be good at it, and you can't be worried about a stall at 60 degrees at minimum airspeed. That takes power to keep that from happening. So you want to go and practice this at 4,000 feet. You don't want to practice this down to the ground. But you can do all those things. Another one that you might practice that's not intuitive is fast flap removal on landing. On a short strip, you got very poor braking with your flaps down. If you get your flaps up, you got a lot more weight on your wheels. You stop shorter. One of the real drawbacks to modern aircraft with electronic flaps, with electric flaps, it takes seconds. The old Johnson bar, boom, it's gone. You just drop it. It's mechanical. So the 1950 vintage plane had a huge advantage, I think, of still having the Johnson bar to do that. Now I get into the things that, these are things I would claim you can all practice safely at altitude. Hone those skills if you think you want to do backcountry flying. Go practice. If things go wrong at 5,000 feet, I mean, you should know how to get out of a spin. You should know how to recover from a stall. You should know all those things. So learn them at altitude. When we start doing real landings, you have to throw away what you learned, and you must develop the confidence to say, I am going to land. I am confident that I can land, no matter what happens. And so you do that regardless of what you encounter. Uphill landings, most people don't practice. There are some nice airstrips. The one I learned on is 5,000 feet at 10 degrees grade up. Go land on that, because you need to put power on to land uphill. You just don't just come in like a normal flat landing. And it looks completely different than a flat strip. You need to get used to that. Try to land downhill on a 10% grade sometime. You know, when you do your flare and you're going to touch down, well, if that ground just keeps falling away from you, it can take 5,000 feet to land downhill. It's not a good idea. 45-degree bank turn to a touchdown point. You don't do a nice square pattern on most of these strips. Some of them require that there's basically no base leg. You'll go right from downwind, peel over, come down, and the end of that turn is the spot that you have to touch. You can't overfly the spot either. So you've got to practice that. It takes a lot of practice. Another one that people don't often do is what I call my helicopter descent. That I come in and I chop the power, full flaps of course, pull the nose back so I can't even see the ground, and I'm falling so fast that I'm below stall speed, right? Because I don't have to hold that airplane in the air, right? It only takes, so you get some extra cushion. You can come down 2,000 feet a minute if you want to in an airplane. And you can come down safely at 2,000 feet. Landing at 2,000 feet a minute is very hard. So the trick is a power descent arrest. And we do this, I practice it all the time. I come down 1,200 feet a minute, right to the touchdown point, and at about 10 feet, I give it exactly the right amount of power to bring that into a perfect flare right at the touchdown point. And that is not easy to do. It takes a lot of practice to make that happen reliably. And then flying as close as possible to obstacles. I use 10-foot horizontal and 5-foot vertical. That's my practice of how close I need to be to obstacles. And I'll show you why. This is Soldier's Bar airstrip. Notice it's not very straight. It sits on a little plateau. It's in the Big Creek drainage, and as you come in, if you want to line up on this part of the airstrip, you have to fly through this mountain, so that's not going to happen. You're going to have to come around over here, and you're going to have to come back and get in. And you can see, here's an Islander doing it. You notice here's the airstrip, and he's clear the hell over there. And that's because he had to go around this. So he's going to come back, and he's going to make another correction back, and he's going to come, and he's going to, of course, miss these trees. He's going to clear the top of those trees by not much, and then he's going to set down. Notice there are water bars on here. Many backcountry strips, the water wants to run down the water bar. So to keep it from running up, you need something to get the water off. So we put these rubber bars across there to divert the water. They're very rough. So, but that's one kind of airstrip. Notice the hump here. This is in the worst possible place. You're going to have not quite enough airspeed on takeoff to fly right there, but you're going to get projected up into the air below minimum airspeed. And now what's going to happen? You either get your airspeed really quickly and get the hell out of here, or you have to make it. You got to make a decision. It's going to go wrong if you can't get airspeed once it throws you in the air. So usually you want to hold it down until you make this turn here. So you got to know what it looks like. From the air, it looks pretty flat. But once you're down, it's not so flat. A lot of approaches, you'll have huge obstacles. If you want to come in here, you fly right down, do a 90-degree turn, and you touch down there. So not a lot of relief to do that. There are a lot of ridge tops. Sometimes we land basically where there is no airstrip. If you've got a nice ridge top, you can successfully land away from the river. And there are only very selective places where I do this. People with 36-inch tires can do this in lots of places, right? You can run over big rocks with 36-inch tires. I can't do it with mine. Now here's a sequence of 3 pictures that show you some of the problems that you'll encounter flying in the wilderness area. There's an airstrip right here around the corner. You can't see it. We're on approach. I actually scanned this from some guy on YouTube, but it showed all the things I wanted. First of all, you got sun in your eyes. Always consider the sun angle on both takeoff and landing on approach. You're trying to fly with your wings just off of these trees so you can make the turn from this side of the river to that side of the river and have as much distance as possible. And of course, give yourself as much chance to see the strip as possible. Now you're at the proper point. You got to make a 45-degree bank turn, come across the river, and touch down. So you got to turn your head to see where flat is here. And then as you come down, if you're a little bit low, you're going to hit this bank. I've seen people come around that corner 20 feet below that bank. Right here, you need to make a decision. If you are too low and you don't have this flight, this sight, and you're looking at the base of this, here's where you want to go. You can always go down the river if you have a major turn. The river doesn't climb or go down fast enough to cause you trouble. Stay on the river. But you need to make that decision. If you try to climb up onto that strip, it's going to be ugly. And you should make the call out here that you're too high. You got to make it at the right time. You've got trees on both sides. You've got places on some airstrips where we've got basically 10 feet on either side of your wing. So you've got to be, you're making a 45-degree blind turn, and you've got to be on the center. So you fly over this, and you look, and you look, and you pick your landmarks, you look at everything, and then you finally go. Doing more, I saw 2 airplanes crunched here last year. This is a 760-foot airstrip. It's got a big bank that's not obvious from the air here. You've got to clear that. If you're too low on the river, you're going to impact that. You want to doing more. Here's an airplane. You can see he's done it successfully. He's just touched down at the point here where it comes up off the bank, and he'll be stopped without a problem. Here is, for most people, what they consider the most aggressive. This is Mile High Airstrip. Can anybody see the airstrip? Not obvious. It's right there. Now keep your eye on those 2 trees and this little tree over here. You have 550 feet to stop before you fall over the other side of this cliff. And this is at 5,700 foot elevation. So it's a hot summer day. As the altitude comes into play, you may have a heavy load, and things can go wrong here. This is what it looks like when you go to touchdown. It's a 25-degree upslope. This is a 2/3 power landing, because you basically are trying to climb up that slope to set down on this. And then as soon as you actually contact, he's actually not down yet. He's off the ground quite a ways. Look where his shadow is. It looks like you want to land here. If you land here, you're going to flip. You've got to land from where this tree, between these 2 trees right there, this is a touchdown point, where it gets smooth, sort of. And it's not a very good picture, but this is right where you touch down. And then you roll to the top of this hill and you stop. And then you turn around, you can come down. I don't have enough power to do that very gracefully. Mine's not a turbocharged engine. So I cheat. I drive up the hill, and you can't see the grade here, but this is up even more. I get up here, and I can do it 45 to this point and gain myself another 100 feet. Not a lot, but 100 feet's worth a lot when you're starting with 550. So we do that. There are other ones I mentioned, being on centerline. This is Vine's airstrip. It's 1,000 feet long, plenty long to land. It's got several problems. One is that it's got this big bank here on the center line. You got to land this way and take off this way. The first time I came out of here, I did my traditional takeoff where I fly the river. The river's a low point, right? Anybody see the problem? That tree, that one lone tree right there. I came off here, and I didn't want to climb this hill because I thought it was too high. I may not make it. I'm going to turn down river. I turned down river. Well, all of a sudden, I've got to make this turn, and I've got that tree. So I have to go around that tree. So I'm going to make a hard 60-degree right bank turn at minimum takeoff speed, and I'm going to roll back the other way 60 degrees to miss that tree and still stay in the river. That's not the way to do this airstrip. I did it once, and I'll never do it again. You have to climb over this. You can't see it as you're climbing. You got to know where you are. You got to know what elevation you can climb to very quickly. And this is what it looks like on the ground. Can anybody see? And this is that airstrip from the ground. If you move off just a little bit, it's this kind of stuff that you're going to hit. Right here is the wheel tracks of landing. So you go off here. There are lots of places where you don't have 3 feet in the side of your tracks to keep your airplane upright. In the state of Montana, all state roads can be used as airstrips by anybody who seeks to. It's the only state I know of that way, but we fly into places to eat, and this is the airstrip. A little road. And sometimes you round that bend and there'll be a truck coming the other way or something, and aircraft have to yield to vehicles on the road. That's interest to do so as well. But you do that, it's a lot of fun. Weather, you all know about weather, I'm not going to belabor it, but inevitably in the summer there are thunderstorms. And everything you're taught will tell you stay away from them. But you want to go someplace, you can't always do that. So we do fly relatively close to thunderstorms. Normally I would not fly into intentionally anything with lightning that big, but this kind of cloud. We try to maneuver around, of course, since it's IFR if you're in it. We have lots of days in the backcountry where it is socked in everywhere. So how are you going to fly? You're going to go IFR? What's the minimum altitude required for IFR above terrain? It's 2,000 feet. Okay. Well, you don't have that. You're going to have to do what we call scheduling. And I love this. If the weather's too bad for IFR, we'll go VFR. Or another way of saying it, maintaining visual contact with the ground while avoiding physical contact with it. And that literally is what we do. When you're flying 50 feet, you are always looking at the ground and you're trying not to hit it. And it's amazing. It's pretty hard to do. I fly, my personal minimum is 150-foot ceiling. And you try to do a turn, 180-degree turn, because you're flying through the cloud with 150-foot total clearance. You better know how to hold your altitude in a turn to avoid the clouds. We have fires, we have smoke from fires, the late season. Don't underestimate, it's very easy here to land in this. Sometimes if the sun is coming right at you through smoke, you could have landed perfectly well and seen for 3 miles, and you can't see 100 yards in the other direction because of all the light diffusion through the smoke particle. So you have to be super careful about smoke. If anybody wants to go backcountry, there's some nice books. Here's one recently written by a young man, Richard Holmes, and he has a great history of remote flying. Fly Idaho was, the backcountry pilots say, the worst thing that ever happened to backcountry flying in Idaho because it told you exactly how to fly every airstrip. It rated them. It gave you all the information. So the people who wanted to learn to fly, that's the way to do it. And then remember, things do happen. I love this. I ran out of airspeed, altitude, and ideas all at the same time. And yes, anybody who's ever crashed an airplane, that's exactly how it happened. Is especially the running out of ideas, that you waited too long. And this happens to be a place I fly a lot. There were just 4 people killed there last summer. Guy clipped the trees, didn't know that on this airstrip, you have to climb this little hill to get out. A better way to do it is to peel off into the river between 2 trees, because you don't need as much altitude, and then you continue down. He tried to clear the hill, clipped the tree, and flipped over and burned. So not cool. So. All right, enough of backcountry flying. Give me 10 minutes to give you the BD-5 tour that you guys may want to hear more about backcountry flying. In 1971, Jim BD, who is an extraordinary developer of airplanes, came up with the concept of the BD-5. And this, he built a kit. He promised you a 200 mile an hour, 38 miles per gallon, $3,000 airplane in 1972. In kit form that any moron can build in his garage in 500 hours. Manual retractable landing gear, pusher prop, full stabilizer in the back for extra control. Very short length on this, very sensitive weight and balance on this airplane. It became very famous because of one of the James Bond movies. They flew the jet version. This has a jet rather than a pusher prop. The airplane weighs 350 pounds. It's the smallest fast jet around at the time. They made a few things in the movie that weren't quite right. It does not have foldable wings. Who the hell would make a tail that folds like that for an airplane? I can't imagine, but it made for great pictures for the movie. They did some things. They really did do this one. 170 mile an hour fly through of a hangar for the movie. And it's interesting to read the guy's description of lining up for this. And it comes out the other side of the doors, not even this far apart, but doing a banked to get out the doors on the other side. Just absolutely ridiculous, but the guy really did it. So there's quite a lure to this airplane. When I was 17, 18 years old when that's happened, I got my pilot's license. Damn, this is going to be the first airplane I own. It has been famous for air shows, and it has flight characteristics that are interesting. You can believe everything here, because that's physical. You can believe nothing that you read down here. This airplane has a 20-foot wingspan. It's going to stall at 55 miles an hour. It's going to take off in 740 feet with a 70-horse engine. Who's ever heard of an airplane whose difference between maximum and cruise speed is 3 miles an hour? I mean, that's absurd. So anyway, when BD built this airplane, the first 4 were completed, crashed, all 4 crashed on their very first flight, 3 of which had fatalities. And not a very good safety record. Then they introduced the longer wings, and of the next 25, they only had 14 crashes and 9 fatalities. So a major improvement in the safety factor for the BD-5. It is now ready for every moron in his garage to build. And he sold somewhere between 8,000 and 12,000 kits for this airplane. This is what I call the ultimate in what we now call innovation and entrepreneurship. Has anybody heard of the concept called minimum viable product? This is what I call the stage of telling the biggest possible believable lie to introduce investment into whatever it is that you're selling. And Jim Beattie did this to perfection. At the time he sold those 8,000 or 12,000 kits for this airplane. And he sold the kits and there was no engine for this airplane. He hadn't built a reliable engine for it yet. So it was hopelessly doomed. And of course it was overpromised in every category here. But I have one. I lusted after this plane for so long, and of course I'm an engineer, and so I have this curiosity about mechanical devices as well as flying. So I found a guy in Seattle, actually a Boeing engineer, an incredible engineer named David Mischke, who had built one of the most successful pusher-prop BD-5s ever built. He built it all himself. He put 110 horsepower. It's designed for 50. It needs 70, and he put 110 in. A water-cooled, 4-stroke Hurst engine. He tuned the exhaust, the prop to this, and has flown this airplane 200 hours. Now, why is he selling it? You always want to ask yourself that question, right? Well, he built another one that they never fly. And he succeeded. About 2 months after I bought this airplane from him, he broke the record for the BD-5. And 1 month later, he crashed it. And he didn't get killed, fortunately. He got pretty dinged up back, and he had a very simple mechanical problem. It has, for this pusher prop, you've got a belt drive from the engine to the drivetrain. And this is a weird pusher prop. It's got a clutch built into the drivetrain. Now, why would you do that? Well, what's the biggest drag on an airplane when you're gliding on an engine? Prop, right? So he made a freewheeling prop, so if your engine fails, it'll just freewheel, and you won't get the drag. But he wasn't doing it for that reason. He was convinced this can be a glider. And this is the shortest wingspan glider ever conceived, with 20-foot wingspan. It was a horrible glider. But anyway, the drivetrain, and this belt drive on here failed on David Mischke. It's got a tensioning device on it, and the bracket that held the tensioning device broke, and he lost power and couldn't get back to the airstrip, and he had no. But unfortunately, he walked through it. This is mine. When I bought it, I hung it up in my garage, and I started working on it. I took everything apart. Here you can see the engine from that Hurst to the drivetrain. Here's the shaft that goes up to the drive. One of the problems with this airplane is, see the thrust angle from this propeller. When you're at full power, that is pushing your nose down. Okay? Now what happens when you have an engine failure on takeoff? Worst possible thing is for that nose to come up. Because even in all your airplanes, what do you learn on power failure on takeoff? Get that nose down, get your rear speed up. So now you've got an airplane that wants to do the reverse of that. All hell can break loose very quickly on power failure. This has the world's worst disc brakes. It came from the factory. There's a conventional disc, and there are 2 1-inch pads, 1-inch diameter cylindrical pads that push both from the same side of the disc. There's no caliper grabbing both sides of the disc. Pushing on one side. What kind of engineer would design a brake like that? So I went out and taxi tested this. As this has an over-the-fence airspeed of 90 miles an hour for landing. Now, how many people have been on a go-kart at 90 miles an hour? That's what this is. You are sitting about this far off the ground. You're going 90 miles an hour. It's really disconcerting. The steering is through differential braking. There's no control of the nose wheel. So it's just free castering nose wheel, and you steer with brakes, with the world's worst brakes. And so I, on one of my early missions, had a brake failure on one side. Now, differential steering, in reality, requires not a brake, but it requires 2 brakes. If you try to stop with one brake, you're going to make a turn. So I arrived at the point where there's nothing to do but apply the one brake that I had to try and lose airspeed, or ground speed, before I went off the runway. So I ran off the runway about 50 miles an hour. Fortunately, I was at a big airport, and I ran off and I came off between lights, and nothing got hurt too much, other than the fact that one of my gears, when it made this scrunching turn, buckled and went back up into the receiving hole here, and skidded a little bit, did a little bit of damage, nothing too severe. So that was my introduction to the first week of owning the BD-5 and doing serious testing. I rebuilt all of the undercarriage from that. I've done a whole bunch of work on it. It was almost ready to fly again. I tore it all apart, inspected everything. And then I found out that the main bracket that holds my tail on when I took it apart is completely cracked through on one side and being held sort of on the other side. You could flex it and tell something was wrong. So I tore the panel off, and sure enough, it was broken all the way through. One look at that, and you would say, holy shit, I can't believe that anybody ever thought this was going to last. It's only got 200 hours on it, but it's such a flimsy piece of metal. It needs to be beefed up. So that's my mission now is I am at my retirement a year from now. I'm going to be back in the BD-5 business again. I'm going to put that thing back together. My stated goal is to fly it 10 to 15 hours and take it to Oshkosh and give it to one of you guys. I am not going to be flying this airplane other than just to say I did. So anyway, that's the long and the short of the BD-5. It's kind of a sad saga of a beautiful, sexy-looking airplane. You'll never see anything that looks better in a picture than a BD-5. I'd like to see one myself. I have seen it in the air, but I'd like to see it myself. But in reality, I have to make these decisions. Is my time spent better working on building an airplane or rebuilding an airplane or enjoying flying? And I really enjoy flying. So anybody who happens to show up in the state of Idaho, anytime I'm there, I take people flying all the time. I'd love to host you guys and fly out of my place. That would be great. Teach you to fly backcountry airstrips. We've got a school for backcountry flying commercially that's taught in the backcountry. It's really good if you want to learn. Julie McNichol teaches that, Christy McNichol, and it's a really good course if you want to learn backcountry flying. I took 2 hours of instruction from a backcountry pilot, and I could see what needed to be done, and what it is just slowly ratcheting up what you are comfortable doing more and more aggressive in very measured step fashion. So I took a lot of hours to get to where I am now to do that kind of flying. But it's decision making, it's reading terrain, it's doing all those things. And it comes naturally to anybody who's intelligent. I'm sure you all are. So don't be intimidated. You don't have to go out and pay a lot of money to have somebody else teach you how to fly. We'll show you the basics and then go out and do it. Not hard. So. All right, I'm 5 minutes over my allotted hour. I've never done 93 slides in an hour before. That's an all-time record for me. So I hope I haven't bored you to tears. I hope I get you interested in flying. I'd like to see a lot more young people fly. It's a lot of fun. I'd like to see there be a whole new generation of technology for small aircraft flying. And there, of course, are. In kit form, you can get amazing airplanes, even some of the smaller production stuff now. Really nice airplanes. And they're not quite as rugged as I'd like to see for backcountry, but there are some models that are good. So anyway, I'd be glad to take any questions that you guys might have. Yeah.
How is your airport maintained when you're not there?
It is not. I have a rule that I won't land in more than 9 inches of snow, and I have a neighbor come over and check. So if more than 9 inches of snow, I land in town, I have them come and pick me up. I go up, climb on the bulldozer, and I clean it off. Then I fly. So it's basically not maintained. Yeah.
How did you get the house built and delivered? Is there a road here?
Well, there actually is a road to here. And in fact, this house, this part was built when I bought it. I added this whole part on. So it actually has, full electric power. It has road access. It's 3.5 miles from the main highway out of Salmon. So it's not that remote. But there are many buildings built in these in-holdings, in the remote, where everything's plumbed and built, and that is a really expensive proposition. Yeah.
If you're interested in backcountry, why a conventional gear aircraft like the 206 versus a larger tail dragger?
Well, if you're a really good pilot, there's every advantage to a tail dragger. If you're not a really good pilot, there's every disadvantage to a tail dragger. They require real precision of rudder control. If you learn to fly on a tail dragger, you'll be a much better pilot for sure. They take off better. Of course, you can take them off. You hold your brakes and rev the engine and lift the tail. Now you're down to 2 wheels, and you don't have that. And then you've got the right perfect attitude in a tricycle gear to get the nose wheel up. You got to have the nose up. Now you've got extra drag. So the tail dragger is much better on short takeoff than a tricycle gear is. Of course, the nose gear, traditionally that's what gets beat up, and people scrunch their nose gear. So you have to practice all the time. Every backcountry landing is full yoke in your chest. I do that on a 9,000-foot airstrip. I take off exactly the same way and I land exactly the same way. And these guys in the control towers can never believe it when I stop and turn off on the first entrance point of the airstrip. I practice the same thing everywhere. But you've got to keep that nose wheel up or it's going to get damaged. I did lose my nose wheel once on a landing on a rock or something sharp. It just deflated and I didn't have a nose wheel. The roughest landing I've ever made. I couldn't imagine what had gone wrong, but I got out and I looked and okay, I see what it is. I, of course, didn't have a spare nose tire with me and I'm flying by myself and I'm in the middle of nowhere. So what do? You go, why? Just did a landing without a nose wheel. I must be able to do a second landing without a nose wheel. So I pour the coals to it, lift it up as far as possible, get the non-existent nose gear off the ground, roll down the runway and take off. Much too steep of angle to get, I was fortunate there was a little bit longer airstrip, it was 1,500 feet, so I could, with extra friction, still get off the ground. So I flew it back to my place and landed without the nose wheel.